Welcome to another edition of Gilligan Sheppard TV. Welcome back to Evana Lithgow from Working Minds, our human dynamics and mechanics and behavioural expert. And of course, Bruce Sheppard is joining us again. Today's topic, we're going to discuss business fatigue in this time of the COVID uncertainty and the different challenges, both business and interpersonal challenges that business people, owners and families may have. So welcome to you both, and we'll jump into some questions about these times ahead. So given that we've come out of 2 lockdowns, and today Auckland is due to receive a verdict on whether we're coming out of level 1 or continuing for a period of time in level 2 or 2.5 or the current setting. What are the traps and pitfalls that business owners fall into when they start thinking about what's next? We've had business owners jokingly say, 3 more lockdowns until Christmas. This is obviously having a great impact on the mental state of business owners. Evana?
Yeah, good question. I guess from my perspective, I think the thing to be mindful and careful of is what I'd call extremes. So whether those extremes be really positive or really negative outlook, actually and surprisingly, the most dangerous outlook that you can have is an extremely positive one, because it can be unrealistic and set you up for a bit of a correction down path. I think it's wise to kind of draw on. Jim Collins did some work in his Stockingdale interview where he referenced many times the learnings from prisoners of war. Now, I'm not suggesting, Bruce, that we're prisoners of war in any way, shape or form before you go getting too excited, but really he looked into what was it that defined surviving or success versus not surviving. And it came down to 3 elements. It came down to connecting with what you see rather than ignoring it. So being in the moment, doing some scenario planning, and having a look at what your options are early. Connecting with what your worst nightmare could be, and actually setting about developing a plan and talking with people so it's out in the open, and choosing your response. So thinking about where you're at in terms of mental space and how you're spending your time, and asking yourself a simple question of, is what you're thinking or what you're doing going to help you get where you want to be? And if the simple answer to that is no, well then I think some careful consideration as to whether or not you continue down that thought pattern or continue with that activity is probably some time and energy well spent and well preserved.
Wow, so making a deliberate effort to think about those scenarios and the options about them. Yeah,
early. I mean, you've never got more time and more options with your options than if you actually start to face them head on and involve others in the conversation.
Bruce, often we see people who are, and I'm taking Ivana's comment about extreme positiveness about the future and their options. How would you look at businesses at this stage that are coming through with incredibly optimistic views and plans for the future and are being supported by various echo chambers that just can, taking Ivana's point, they're talking to people, they're getting insight, but they're just getting positive reinforcement rather than the reality check?
There seem to be 2 paradigms. The first lockdown was sort of surreal. It happened in autumn. The weather was nice. There was fairy dust. There was plenty of cash. The initial impact of a pandemic was fear. It passed very quickly. Many came out of that first lockdown cashed up. Balance sheets had survived and had built financial resilience, and the perception that many businesses had was we're invincible. Along comes the second lockdown. Second lockdown was, my God, it's not over. We haven't eliminated it. They could keep doing this, to your point, Michael, 4 more lockdowns to Christmas. And people were counting the number of lockdowns they could survive, whether it was 4, 3, 2, or 1 or 0. In short, the second lockdown, forget the pandemic, forget whether or not COVID's likely to kill anyone or not. The health response and the ripple effect economic response threw many from euphoria because they'd survived into fear of the unknown. And I agree with Evana. The key issue is simply to focus on the middle. Life will return to normal. You just don't know how long. You don't even know what normal will look like. Focus on the things you can control. Ensure that you can take another couple of punches in this and just keep your hand on the tiller and your weight and your sails full of wind and keep moving. It's very easy to panic, and it's very easy to be overly optimistic. Overly optimistic generally means you overcommit, you make silly decisions, and you go broke faster. Panicking tends to leave you in a situation where you do nothing, in which case you stand still, and both can be dangerous. Standing still, you lose opportunity as competitors and other businesses start to change. Keep a weather eye on the light, and the light will become clearer early next year when we get through the ripple effect of the first and second lockdown. Keep a steady hand on the till. Don't panic, Captain Mannering, which I think, Michael, was your first blog on the topic.
So what role then does government play, Bruce, for business? You know, everybody wants stable government that is very predictable in how they're going to react. And of course, the opposite can have quite a destructive impact on business, both performance-wise and, you know, to the well-being of the enterprise, especially if it's a family enterprise. So given that there is an element of unpredictability of government, how do you factor for that in your planning, Bruce, and trying to stay down that middle course, not being too optimistic or being too pessimistic?
World view or New Zealand view, Michael?
Well, let's think about the New Zealand view.
Okay.
That's closer to what we can control.
Okay. So New Zealand has a political system that effectively ensures that no government will ever have unfettered discretion to behave like lunatics. The Greens want to introduce a wealth tax, which really looks like a revisited version of Roger Douglas's asset tax. It will never come to pass because they will never be able to convince a major player that that makes sense. Equally, any extreme unpredictability, no matter what noise the political parties make, takes a long time to come to pass. We are now beyond the unpredictability of Robert Muldoon with retrospective legislation on the hoof. The reality is democracy in New Zealand generally works quite well and it moderates extremism. However, to win votes at this time, everyone has to portray extreme policies, which of course creates endless phone calls of how do I avoid a wealth tax? Well, don't sweat it, it'll never happen, at least not on this watch. So fundamentally, New Zealand is fairly stable if you take away all the noise. Economically, we're also fairly stable insofar as the Crown debt absorbed and the Reserve Bank debt absorbed through quantitative easing is absolutely a repeat of the push forward game. For example, World War I came along, Britain mortgaged itself to the hilt. Life went on for those that came out of the war. The debt only got repaid this year.
Wow.
But it got repaid. In short, you push it forward and it disappears. And I guess my parents and I and my children paid for World War I without actually knowing it. It became invisible. And it became invisible because society progressed, it remained innovative, it continued to create new businesses and new assets. And so long as we leave an environment that encourages and rewards aspiration, human endeavour will continue creating things, finding new ways to do things, increasing our productivity, and we can actually absorb an awful lot. If you look back at New Zealand's history, we're a very different country to what we were 30 years ago and 60 years ago. What we can absorb in the future is a quantum leap on what we think we can absorb today. So we're financially resilient as well. I think we shouldn't oversweat the uncertainty and the noise that's being created by economists, bankers, and politicians. We should focus on what we're good at. We should focus on enhancing that, and we should just keep walking, creating, and enhancing relationships and businesses. And if we all do that, life will be fine.
So coming back to your earlier point, Evana, we mentioned, some of Jim Collins's tips on survival.
Yeah.
How do you connect in the moment, given the environment that Bruce has just painted, which seems, very reasonable? Are there any tips on how you can, connect in the moment in terms of being able to make those key decisions, for your family and for your business?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about being really clear on what you actually care about. Because otherwise, in this really digital social world, you can end up devoting a lot of energy, time, and attention to things you don't even care about because a whole lot of other people are caring about it online. So know what you care about, know what you can do something about, and then know what you can actually control. And I would say really focus on preserving some of your energy because this is actually a longer game. Bruce has just spoken about it. The debt from the previous wars has just been paid off in the UK this year. That took a little while. Now, we don't know how long this will take, and I'm not sitting here prophesying that. But, history tells us it's a long game. So it's a marathon. It isn't a sprint. So pace yourself. And I think your natural response as a person is different if you feel like you're doing something. Have a voice, share your stories, support others, talk about what's going well. We're very quick to talk about all of the things that have gone wrong through this, but there have been some fantastic innovations, ideas, businesses, groups, collaborations, initiatives that has come out of this very difficult time. And so it is also about keeping that balanced perspective. Granted, it might not be easy at times, but you've got to almost not just naturally go to a dark and doomy space, and be prepared in some of your conversations with yourself or with others to talk about some of these alternate views, right?
Well, touching on one of Bruce's other comments here, we've had, again, the rush seems to happen every pre-election when there's talk about tax, the calls about how do we structure things and worrying about the things that aren't going to happen. But the other aspect of that is, a lot of business owners are asking how they should be feeling or the things that they should be thinking about. How do you support somebody who's in that frame of mind where they're actually struggling to decide what's important? Your point about preserving energy is a really good one, and and focusing on the long game. But what are those challenges, to ensure mental energy levels are high when you're faced with the different challenges? Because not everybody can rationally summarize it as Bruce did earlier about what's going to happen or the reality of the situation.
I think it comes back to knowing first, where we find ourselves. It's strange times. So to feel a little bit out of sorts would not be unusual. It might be highly unusual if you were completely put together when everything else seems very much unknown. I don't know anyone whose year has really panned out as they thought it would. So the first thing is to just hold it a little bit lighter and be a little bit kinder to yourself. Now, I know those words have been grossly overused by various people quite publicly recently, but there is a kernel of truth in there. Humans are social beings. So when it comes to being physically isolated and restricted, it is going to have a negative impact over time on people, and we do need to know that. So you need to look for ways to genuinely connect with others during these times. So many businesses are still working from home, which means there are a lot of people that are not getting the usual connection and interaction with others. And one of the things I say to people is just be really careful that you're not just consuming at this time, you are actually connecting, because I'm hearing people talk a lot about, I was on this platform and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and I was on this platform, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and they're just reading other people's views. They're not necessarily thinking about what it means for them, what the drivers might be, what they're grateful for, what's going on, how relevant it is. They're just kind of just responding. And it's a very common phenomenon when we're under pressure to respond, to react, to have that fight or flight, and just fail to see that gap and take that moment to think about it. Self-care is really important at this time. And, it's the old Air New Zealand principle, first put the face mask on yourself and then take care of others. And it starts pretty simply. It starts with the exercise, the sleep, the food, the connection, and the boundaries, including, social media and news. For some people, it's not social media that's driving them insane. It's watching, the news all day while they're at home. So, make sure you are checking in on yourself, not just other people. How am I? What do I need? Do I need to just go for a walk and get some sunshine in a 5-minute break? Do I need to actually phone someone up and just talk to them? What do I actually need? And manage it, because it is a very dynamic situation. But one of the things I am seeing is a lot of what I'd call amateur psychology coming from the right place. There are some people who are really experiencing relational breakdown. They're experiencing personal depression, and, children with learning and behavioural difficulties and anxieties. And these things are real. Now, just because someone shares that with you, it doesn't necessarily become your problem to solve. It can become your problem to support the person, but not solve the problem. So having a few kind of ideas as to what you can say to people, encourage them to talk to their doctor. There could be something more going on. There is lots of resources out there online that people can draw on, and it can range from the Need to Talk text site, where if you send a text message, you can talk to a trained counsellor, and that's where you just simply text 1737, and they will phone you, they will text you, they will email you. It's a completely free service at this time. There is also the COVID website has fantastic resources for individuals and for businesses with what to do for either family members themselves or staff and employees. So get yourself familiar with these things and don't be afraid to engage with them. A lot of people are giving a lot of their time and energy for free at this time to support other New Zealanders. So embrace it.
Wow. Bruce, do you have any sort of observations? Because again, you're hearing from lots of different business owners, whether they're family businesses, small or large. What's the sense you're getting about that paradigm of, are they really connecting, or are they just consuming advice?
They're consuming data, whether it's advice, media, social media, news, whatever. They're consuming data, and the data they're consuming is conflicting. It's all over the place. There's no clear pattern. There's no real advice. It's just a confusing array of noise. And much of the data comes from echo chambers of what I call borderline insanity. And you can be forgiven for thinking you're living in a nut farm, because there's an element of craziness in how collectively we as humans are reacting to this data. And everyone will have their own view of what's crazy, and everyone looking at the person judging the crazies will think, everyone else will think the person looking at them's crazy. Probably, I found during lockdown, the first lockdown, the easiest way to avoid being confused by noise was not to watch any news, not to look at any digital content at all, apart from connecting with my team and my clients and endeavouring to say, ignore the noise, it will pass. It's like a thick fog of mustard gas that if you consume it, you're going to get ill. So to Evana's point about taking out time for yourself, the only way you will ever get time for yourself is to disconnect from externalities, and in particular, the crazy externalities of news feeds, everything. And then people say to me, well, if you disconnect from the news, how do you know what's happening? I say, walk along the street, observe people, have conversations with other people, hear what real people are saying and thinking. And if you do enough of that, you'll know what's happening in your environment that's real to you. Connect with your networks, ignore the noise is a good way to stay connected, stay sane, and avoid collective human lemming behavior.
I mean, that's, this is really interesting feedback in terms of, Ivana's earlier point about being clear about what you care about, preserving energy, and then, your point, Bruce, about being able to shut off and avoid that lemming behavior. I'm guessing as we think how different societies have reacted to different challenges in the past, resilience is now going to become a big talking topic. And already, Bruce, we're talking to businesses around their business strategy, and they're wanting to be resilient and want to know, am I resilient enough? As if there is a scale or a litmus test. It's like, well, we're just looking at, different factors or risk mitigation strategies. But to you, what does resilience look like to you from a business perspective? And then Evana, if you can comment about resilience from a human interpersonal perspective would be good.
So look, there are layers in business. If you run out of cash, it's like a body running out of oxygen, you're dead. So you must ensure that you have access to sufficient cash to nurture your people, your relationships, your supply chain, and your customers. Assuming your balance sheet is in reasonable shape, meaning you're collecting your debtors, you're managing your inventory, and you've got enough free cash, even if it's free cash from liquidating assets, you will have an element of balance sheet resilience. But that's not enough. In order to be resilient, you have to understand who the important relationships are in your business. You've got to understand why they're important to you, and you have to understand how to deepen them, which means this has been an ideal time to look at your business and say, why do I do what I do? What matters? Why does it matter? Who and what do I care about? And how do I ensure I support my community to survive and collectively be resilient? So there's an element of building communities of collective resilience that actually hold out hands to each other to collectively survive, grow, and be better each day. But I think actually beyond resilience, because those that aren't resilient will disappear and the resilient will then still be standing. In order to move forward, they have to have the courage to keep walking and the adaptability to choose counterintuitive paths. So in fact, I think the true characteristics are not resilience. It's taken as a given for those that don't end up dead in a ditch. The true characteristics of making the best of this are courage and adaptability.
Evana, your thoughts about resilience? Or
for once, mine aren't 1,000 miles away from Bruce's. For me, look, resilience is more than bounce back. I think people think that, resilience is the ability to bounce back. No, it is more than that. It's about managing your energy, having resources, and having strategies. Yeah. It's also, to Bruce's point, more than an individual concept, because you can be a very resilient individual, but there's also team resilience, business resilience, industry resilience, and location or geographic resilience. And we're starting to see this play within certain industries. I hate to kind of put a spotlight on it, but if you look, there's some wonderfully sad examples of some brilliant businesses in tourism that with wonderful leaders that are just having that a hell ride at the moment. Yeah. So individual or business resilience isn't enough, to Bruce's point, but it is important to really understand the elements of resilience, which is support. So it's the quality of your relationships and the quality of advice that you get. It is confidence, which is defined as your belief to beyond your own comfort zone, right? To perform beyond your comfort zone. It's looking at perseverance, perception, and flexibility. And this is where this word pivot has been used to the extent to which some people are about to scream. But it is about being able to strive, right? And that comes back to the points of seeing this as a long game. And it is about recovery. It is about rest, reflection, and re-energizing. And that is the element of resilience that most people are familiar with. Yeah? But most importantly, resilience is about adapting. It is about learning. It is about evolving. It is, and all of that requires a forward momentum and putting one foot in front of the other.
Wow. Guys, that's brought us to the end of our time, or very near the end of the time. If there are any other, if you have a closing comment, please feel free to add it. But that's just been a tremendous summary and approach, and certainly I'm feeling a lot more energized. Bruce, did you have a comment, and we'll leave Evana with the last word?
Sure. World's uncertain. Retain hope.
Nice.
Yeah, I would say something similar. It's interesting in unusual times, but the sun still comes up, and the stars and the moons still come out. So keep perspective, keep faith, keep plodding forward.
Well, what a great message for us is, in terms of family as well as businesses. So that is really an inspiring message from you both, and appreciate your time, and look forward to the next one. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Michael.
Bye.